Up until recently, many Fire Emblem fans have been very weary of where the series was headed. Fire Emblem hasn't been putting its best foot forward for various reasons lately, and it seemed like many people were ready to give up on the series if this new one didn't deliver. Something I honestly was very concerned about as well, as the first thing they showed off for Three Houses didn't impress me in any shape or form, with it not looking or feeling like a Fire Emblem game, not really looking good in general, and not telling us anything of value about the game. Though, now that Fire Emblem Three Houses is out and we're able to play it ourselves, it's really good. It's very different from any Fire Emblem game before it, but it's good. And I want to talk about it, which is why you and I are here right now. I will say though that the beginning portion of this video will not contain major plot spoilers, so don't worry about that. I'll start by saying this. Fire Emblem is not a series you usually go to for the most gripping of stories. They're usually just about bad dragon, sorcery cult people versus the good noble people. Their messages are usually war, bad. However, the way Three Houses presents its story and characters is really unique and ties into that war, bad message in a neat way. The game is about you being a professor at a church-run academy, and you must choose a class from 3 different houses to be in charge of. After you pick the class you're in charge of, that's the path you go with. That's the point of view you experience the whole game from. But it's just one of multiple points of view. Each path with their own experiences, their own pieces of information that make up the bigger whole of what's really going on. Their own reasons and justifications for thinking and doing what they do. You can play one route and think one major character is just pure evil. Go around and play another route, and suddenly you understand that maybe they're not so evil. Having this sort of experience right when the game came out was a rather stressful thing. It had me wondering if I really had chosen the right path, if there was another route that maybe I should have taken instead. At this point, it was hard to tell who was right and who was wrong. During this time, I was actually having a discussion with my friend over the different routes we took, and we both felt we were in the right. That the choices we were making in our respective paths were the only right choices. That is to say, each path does a very good job getting you acquainted with your students, making you see how they perceive the world and its struggles, while vilifying other sorts of characters. Even now, over a week after its release, I see people in comment sections debating and interpreting characters' actions from each path to decide who was redeemable and who wasn't. And really, it's hard to say who is wrong or right in how these players interpret their story from their perspective. Three Houses has a really ambitious narrative that feels very reminiscent of what they tried to do with Fire Emblem Fates, but failed miserably. The problem with Fates being that one kingdom was obviously good, and the other kingdom was obviously bad. But Three Houses, on the other hand, makes the effort to make everyone suspicious within the first hour of the game. I love that. That's terrifying. It's a game that can have you questioning your choices and makes you wonder the possibilities of what it would be like if you had chosen a different party. So it accurately sums up my experience after my parents' divorce. This game introduces brand new concepts, such as what I had already mentioned, you being a professor in charge of teaching a class of students. New gameplay elements involve you working with your students, growing and advancing them in whatever mix-mash of classes and abilities you want for them, all as you get closer with them and learn more about them. The number of characters may feel overwhelming at first, but it'll quickly get broken up as you're only in charge of one of the 3 classes, though eventually you'll be able to recruit students from other classes if you so wish. I feel like this works a lot better for me, rather than how recruitment works in other Fire Emblems. Previously, there would be set chapters in which more characters would just show up and join you for story-related reasons. It's not something you could necessarily foresee, so it kinda just felt like it would happen. For me, it would get to the point where I was already comfortable with the team setups I had, so I rarely would care for any new characters being added. I would just keep with the teams I already had rather than giving these new characters a chance to shine. With Three Houses, however, now you're in charge of a whole class of them, and they're with you throughout the entire game. This way it feels like you really learn to like them more and more as the game goes on, rather than you just getting a little bit of your class at the beginning, and a little bit of class later on, and then a bit more of the class even later still on. None of that. And the characters themselves are a lot of fun, but it doesn't feel as if they completely rely on 1 or 2 non sequitur quirks to completely define what their character is. like in Fire Emblem Fates. It can sometimes get a bit tiring when some characters throw their quirks in your face a bit too often, just to make sure you understand who they are, but they still feel a lot more interesting than many Fire Emblem characters as of late. The class leaders are especially three-dimensional in their characterizations, which feels like a breath of fresh air. As the game progresses, your students even start becoming jaded to war, which is only mildly depressing. Essentially, all of the dialogue in this game is voiced, and the voice acting is mostly top-notch. Characters like Dimitri or Manuela are able to bring an array of different emotions for their characters that really make them feel alive and convincing. Bernadetta can be a bit much, but that's kinda her character. The pacing in this game is a bit different from a typical Fire Emblem game. Before, it would be cutscene, battle, cutscene, cutscene, battle, cutscene, cutscene, battle, and so on. In Three Houses, you have a whole month of activities to do before your big battle, with you being able to choose one activity per week. You can explore the Monastery to do various things. You can do seminars, which help various students rank up their abilities. You can go out to battle to do extra missions that give you extra side story content, or just grind in some maps against some bandits. Or you can just rest, which will help your students' motivation for the next lecture day. These weekly lectures are where being a professor really comes into play, as you decide what area of expertise you want each student to focus on for battle, and can help advance their growth in the classroom. Let's talk about the academy itself. There's a lot to do. You can fish, talk with students, have meals with students, have tea with students, which is about just the most stressful thing in the entire game, more so than the battles. Do side quests where you just walk around the map and it's not particularly interesting, especially when the map tells you where to go to find the items for the side quests, so what's the point? Partake in fighting tournaments to get rewards, and so on. Honestly, I don't see much point in me detailing every single thing you can do in here. I think you get it, but just know that it's easy to lose like an hour or so wandering around the academy each month. And it's worth noting that the academy works really well with pre-established game mechanics, as the point of doing anything in the academy always goes back around to helping yourself and your students get more weapons, get stronger, and get closer. It's a really good feedback loop. This is the point in the video where I'm going to say the game does not look very good. It's very unpolished. There are weird lighting things. There are some really pixelated textures. There's quite a lot of clipping. Just so much clipping. Background characters in battle just fling their bodies around, and it's really hilarious to watch. This is by far the game's biggest weakness. But this game was in part made by Koei Tecmo, so this is a surprise to absolutely no one. Back to the academy. I adore this new inclusion, but by the end of the game, I started having less need to do things at the academy, and I just wanted to get to the next battle. If they started shaving some weeks off to get to the next battle, it might have helped, but it felt as though I had too much time to do things when, by this late in the game, I didn't have much value to do with all this spare time when I already had all my students so advanced with their classes and supports. Also, at the start of each month, you get a cutscene to give you a sense of what life is like in the world around that month. They're nice and they add world building, but these cutscenes mention seasons, like winter. But let me show you this. Here's the academy at the beginning of the year. And here is the academy during winter. You will notice it looks exactly the same. I dearly wish they put more care into the presentation of the academy, as this is a game that goes over the course of some time, so I feel like they should have reflected that with how the academy looks as well, at least with the given seasons. Throw a rainy day or two in there if you're feeling bold. Battle maps themselves, especially at the beginning, aren't much to write home about. They're rather simple, usually pretty big, but their objectives do get a bit more interesting the later you get into the game. It is worth noting, however, that a lot of the maps really focus on you forming into two different groups at the start of the battle, making you weigh the strengths of your team in order to try to divide them evenly to take on two different fronts of enemies on one bigger map. Battles are mostly what you'd come to expect with a game like this, except now you're able to completely control what each student's class will be. Because of this, and they wanted to make any type of class viable for any student, they downplayed the series staple that is the weapon triangle, a concept that would have certain weapons stronger or weaker to one another. Think rock, paper, scissors, essentially. which you can complain about since it makes the gameplay much simpler, but this is also something they did for Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia, and I didn't see people complaining about that one. But maybe that's just because no one played the game, including myself. Another concept from Echoes is the ability to go back in time during battle. This allows you to, if you make a mistake or get bad RNG, to take the chance to correct things. It's a very convenient concept, especially since they've taken out battle saves in favor of this newer concept. Battles are still fun, but the game certainly feels like it's on the easier side of things. I'm not sure how gratifying this game will be for super mega hardcore Fire Emblem fanatics that are looking for the most brutal map design, but this does make the game a much more welcoming experience for newer players to Fire Emblem. Even if things may come off as overwhelming with how many mechanics there are and how many things you have to keep track of with your inventory and students, but I think people could manage. Don't be put off by permadeath, especially since there is casual mode in this game. And don't feel bad about playing casual mode, just play games however you want. There's no need to be a dick about it. Here's a fun con about the game though. Can you make the size of the text any smaller? That would be great. I mean, good lord, I was playing a few feet away on my HD TV and it was difficult to read. Playing in handheld mode was even worse. I had to play the game 2 feet away from my face on my computer monitor, it was so bad. And I'm not the only one that's noticed this. Please, intelligent systems, fix this. This game has a lot of replay value. I so far have beaten one route, but I'm not playing any of the others. For one, I don't have that sort of time. Just one route took me 45 hours, and that was enough. Which this is forcing me to bring up that before the game came out, the director of the game said that it would take 80 hours to beat one route, but that was a lie. Regardless, 45 hours is certainly enough for me to get my money's worth out of the game. Secondly, I watched the cutscenes to get the gist of the other stories, and I don't think my heart can take all that, so I'm just gonna take the one ending I've gotten and just be happy. But for the people who do want to replay the game and have very strong wills about them, the multiple routes here are justified and feel different and unique from one another. Not only from how the main story will play out, but you also get different side stories along the way based on your route. So for those willing to put in the time, it'll be more than worth it for the content. Now this is the last bit before I talk about mega spoilers, but this last thing I'm going to go over is about the ending. I'm not going to talk about specifics of any ending, but I'm just going to talk about the ending in a more general sense. If you want to drop out now, that's fine, I understand. But before we get into anything else, I will say, if this game looks interesting to you and you haven't played it, I recommend it. It's a really fun game and a really unique experience. It has a really satisfying feedback loop. The characters are memorable. The story is exciting and one of the best in the franchise. It's really good. If I were forced to give an arbitrary number out of 10 to describe this game, it would be 8.5 out of 10. But anyway, the ending. It's not as satisfying as it should be. The story doesn't really wrap up in any way. It leaves you with the sense that there's so much more to be done. Like there could have easily been a whole other arc added to the end of the game, but it just ends without that. Which, that's life. Things don't end and begin in any clear-cut, satisfying way. But for closure of a huge epic RPG, this really doesn't do it for me. Actually, the very last taste of the game hinges on who you decide to marry. So if you decide to not marry anyone, then I guess you're just going to get an even lamer ending. Which is absolutely fair because 99.9999% of Fire Emblem players, including myself, are horny, and a major reason they're even playing the game to begin with is because they just want to go for their desired wife and or husband. But again, from a storytelling perspective, it comes off as unsatisfying. It doesn't feel final. And if you don't romance your house leader for that path, it almost feels even more unsatisfying from the perspective of the greater story. Like, yeah, I want to bang the teacher, but us confessing our love to one another doesn't really feel like what should be capping off this whole story about loss, deception, and war. Alright, so here we are, the mega spoiler section of this video. If you've gotten to this point in the video, I am to assume you have either played the game or do not care about spoilers, as I will be getting into specifics now. You've been warned. 3, 2, 1, and Edelgard is the Flame Emperor. Now, it seems this wasn't obvious in the Blue Lions or Golden Deer route, but for the Black Eagles route, it was the most obvious thing imaginable. Aside from my first reaction to hearing the Flame Emperor talk with her altered voice being, this is clearly a woman's voice they're trying to disguise. The game gave out way too many hints at her being the Flame Emperor. The first hint, and when I immediately knew something was wrong, was Chapter 6, where the game takes Edelgard out as a playable unit for this one, and only this one chapter, and only this one character, ever, in the entire game. That is so the Flame Emperor can appear at the very end of the chapter to stop the conflict. Because of course, Edelgard and the Flame Emperor can't be at the same place at the same time. I wonder why? And the name Flame Emperor, come on. At that point, why have a fake name? Edelgard is the bearer of a flame crest, and she will one day be Emperor. Yeah, what are you hiding? Could you have made this more obvious? Also, at the end of Chapter 6, the Flame Emperor declares how they will reforge this world, something Edelgard would say. So I'm asking, what's the point of this disguise if you're going to go this far with the foreshadowing? To be fair though, naming herself so blatantly as the Flame Emperor does fall in line with her character, as she isn't exactly the most creative type. It did take her a whole night to come up with the terrible name, the Black Eagle Strike Force, after all. But the foreshadowing doesn't stop there. After Chapter 6, a suspicious character shows up called Monica. Monica is always around Edelgard, and whenever Monica approaches Edelgard, they always have to step away to talk privately. Shortly thereafter, it turns out Monica is a bad guy and she kills your dad. Kinda weird she turned out to be bad, but was always around Edelgard, and they always went off to talk to each other in private. But it doesn't stop there either. In one line, Edelgard goes out of her way to mention that it's naive to think of people as only allies or villains, which, in an isolated incident, if she only just said that would be fair. But now you're just flaunting it. But there is one last flaunt. The Flame Emperor eventually approaches you and asks for you to join them. They disappear when Hubert runs up to you in surprise, wondering where Edelgard is. Which, when this first happened, I thought this implied Hubert didn't know Edelgard was the Flame Emperor, but he does know. So I don't know why Hubert came running up wondering where Edelgard was if he knew that Edelgard would be doing something as the Flame Emperor, and in turn this would only just make things more suspicious. So why did Hubert But after that, Edelgard talks to you about how the Flame Emperor approached you. She says how it's understandable that you wouldn't trust a stranger in a Scooby-Doo villain mask, but perhaps one day soon this stranger will appear to you again without their mask to try to talk to you about joining them. And Could you give me more red flags, please? I don't think I've had it beaten into my skull far enough what you're trying to do with this foreshadowing, please. Is this even foreshadowing anymore? You're just telling me at this point. Stop. I get it. That one scene would have been enough. That one conversation with Edelgard, where she mentions how the Flame Emperor will appear to you without their mask, would have been all they needed. It would have been perfect, actually. Just that one bit of foreshadowing that's enough to make the player go, Wait, what? You know, Edelgard, that's kind of a weird thing to say. You're being kind of suspicious, actually. I don't know. And it would work for her character, too, as she would be subtly trying to tell you that she'll want you to understand why she's doing what she's doing. No matter what route you choose, Edelgard never wanted you as an enemy, to the point of those being her last words before you kill her in Claude's route. But instead of just that one hint, we get this whole laundry list of reasons as to why we know Edelgard is the Flame Emperor. After your father is murdered right before your very eyes, because of course, it's a dad in a Fire Emblem game, he had to die, Edelgard immediately tells you to get over it. I would understand this if almost your whole month passes and you're still moping around, Really, they could have made this a gameplay thing, where the game forces you to miss out on time you would normally be using for activities. Then she could give you crap for moping around. But it's like the next day that she's telling you to get over your father's assassination. I know Edelgard can be distant, but I also know she has a heart deep down, and she knew that her uncle was responsible for your father's assassination, so I feel like she should have been a little more sympathetic. Having a scene later on in part 2 where she stops to talk to you about how sorry she is that your father's murder happened the way it did would have been a good way to rectify this. But that didn't happen between you and her. Instead, you had a scene similar to what I just described, but it's between you and Hubert, and it's way down the line. That all being said, I will defend Edelgard to the grave for being a more complex, tragic character. I know a lot of people hate her, and I understand why, which is a shame, but I can't help it. A big reason why I won't play the other routes is because my heart can't take playing dozens and dozens more hours, but just having to end up killing her, so I'm not going to. Those 2 battles in part 1 of the game where all 3 classes fight one another was really neat. Having everyone on the battlefield at once was nice foreshadowing and memorable as a chapter. This was one way they tried to make you connect more with other classes, but I feel like they could have done more in this regard. I wish they did a better job to acquaint you with the other houses, as to make the impact later in the game more impactful. An easy way to do this would have been to just add a couple monthly missions where you had to do the mission alongside another house. Like when you go to the tower to take down those bandits, and it's your first experience with the giant monster. They could have just made it so Rhea had assigned you and the golden deer to take down the bandits, because she had a bad feeling that something would transpire or whatever. And then after that, Rhea could have just assigned another mission with you and the blue lions. Stuff like that would have been nice, just so you could feel that much closer to these characters before you had to kill them. Alright, the time skip was really cool for the story, but I kind of groaned in the way they did it. For one reason or another, based on which route you chose, you kind of just stopped being conscious for exactly 5 years, exactly to the day, 5 years. And then you wake up after somehow no one finding you anywhere, and you just go back to where your house leader would be at because you made a promise to them exactly 5 years ago to the day to meet them at that location. It felt contrived, to say the least. I never thought I'd see the day that Fire Emblem got mechs and dubstep music. I'm alright with the former, but the latter of that, not so much. Big enemies look intimidating and neat. It's nice how many variations there are, and how some of them play into the story, and not just some obscure random new addition for no reason. There's something that'll make you think in different ways for strategies, since they can hit hard, and they don't go down with just one attack, even if you get a crit, since they have multiple health bars. And Black Eagle's route, second to last chapter, got really annoying with those big monsters. The only way I won was with cheese. Look, I know this game was inspired by Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, but they really got creative with their ancestral tones in this one, didn't they? Having one character be essentially your grandmother, mother, daughter, and wife, that's it's pretty unique, if that's an appropriate word for that. After Fire Emblem Fates came out, everyone complained how the main character was so emotional and stupid, which is fair. So, seemingly in response to that, they made the main character in Three Houses this completely unfeeling, emotionless character. Other characters are shocked at any given moment whenever we so much as smile. I find that to be utterly hilarious that they went with this. Thankfully, they made the story related as well, why we're absolutely just emotionless. Literally to the point of stating how we do not even have a beating heart. That's hysterical, and I love it. It feels different to have a self-insert like this rather than Robin or Corrin. It makes for a bit of a more interesting main character in a way. Now, if only we could get a self-insert that isn't completely loved by everyone for barely any reason at all. One step at a time. This game will be getting DLC. Included with that will be story-related DLC. I have absolutely no idea how or where they would fit DLC like this into the story, unless it's some type of Fire Emblem Fates Revelation situation, where it'll be one route where everyone will set aside their differences, learn that they're not so different after all, and will work towards a common goal. And I'm torn. I am torn with this idea. Something needed to happen in the world of Three Houses in order to make life better. But there's no good answer the game currently gives you that makes it so everyone can get off happy and alive. There's no good ending. There's no true ending, which I like. I appreciate that. Not only does this make each route more distinct of an experience, but it only more realistically reflects what war really is. People who may have even known each other having to put their blade to one another's throat. People with values that really are just the same, but circumstances and just life had them go down severely different paths. People doing questionable things, be it either because you're not sure why they're doing it, or because they're just mistaken, or maybe even being manipulated. Maybe they took things too far. Maybe they were just going off of false information and didn't know any better. Maybe it's because they felt there was no other way. It's a complex situation, this story. One where people can even discuss their experience with it and try to explain to others who they felt was in the wrong or not. And this game feels unique because of that. So, is it really the right thing to do for the game? To just plop in another ending after the fact that smooths out all the bumps and puts a smile on everyone's face? One that, in a way, feels like it might undercut the entire purpose of what the game is. For me, I can go either way. On an artistic level, I like how things have been laid out for the player to see and experience, with no right path. Though on another level, I must admit, the more baby side of myself that believes in the myth known only as emotions would feel satisfied seeing this world wrapped up in a bow. Seeing the characters able to live their lives together, finally happy. You spend dozens and dozens of hours with these characters. The least you want is for them to be able to live their lives. All they ever wanted was to have stable, peaceful lives together, to have a new dawn. And unlike in reality, we are completely able to give them that happy ending. So, it's only natural, I feel, to want that. But I suppose that is for intelligent systems to decide to do or not. All I know is that, until then, I know this game will continue to stick with me. After all this, I'm excited to see what the future will be for this DLC and for Fire Emblem. I was skeptical at first and not at all excited for the game, but after experiencing it myself, I came out of Three Houses feeling a complex array of emotions that a game has yet to ever make me feel before. And that, on any sort of level, is something I will always remember and appreciate. Thank you for watching. I felt this was more of a casual sort of video, since I really just wanted to talk about Three Houses and my thoughts while everything was still fresh and the game was just out. But I hope you enjoyed it regardless. Thank you again, and good night.